They fired on 2 ships this morning. No warning, no flag, no radio call, just open water and then open fire. And before this video ends, you are going to understand exactly why that matters to your wallet, your food supply, and the global balance of power, starting right now. This is April 22nd, 2026. We are 54 days into the most dangerous geopolitical crisis the world has seen since the Cold War. And the strait where it is all happening, the Strait of Hormuz, is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles through which 1/5 of all the oil consumed on this planet moves every single day. This morning, 2 Iranian Revolutionary Guard speedboats approached commercial tankers in that strait and opened fire. No lights, no radio signal. 2 ships struck, containers blown off the deck, steel bent. No fatalities, but that was not the point. The point was the message. And that message was aimed directly at the White House. If you are just finding this coverage, subscribe right now. We track this story every single day, and the next 48 hours may be the most consequential of this entire conflict. Here is what the headlines are missing. 10 days ago, on April 13th, President Trump signed an executive order imposing a full naval blockade on all Iranian ports. No petroleum vessel in or out without explicit authorization from Washington. It sounded like maximum pressure. What it actually did was hand Iran a legal and moral justification for everything that happened in the Strait this morning. Because here is what almost no one is explaining clearly. A ceasefire had already been signed. On April 8th, brokered by Pakistan, the only country both sides would talk to, Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The United States agreed to impose no new restrictions during the truce window. Then Trump ordered the blockade while that truce was still active. Iran's official position, backed by the letter of what was signed in Islamabad, is that the United States violated first. And technically, they are not wrong. The IRGC's Joint Military Command issued a statement calling the blockade what they described as maritime piracy under a legal disguise. That statement is the formal justification for the boats you saw firing this morning. This is what happens when 2 powers use a ceasefire as a tactical pause rather than a genuine path toward peace. Now, before we go deeper, and this next section is the part that will genuinely change how you see this crisis, drop a comment right now. Do you think the Wednesday deadline passes without open escalation, or do you believe we are hours from something far worse? Tell us below. We read every single response, and it directly shapes what we cover next. Let us talk about what Iran actually fired at, because the sequence matters, and most reporting is getting it wrong. At 9:20 in the morning local time, an IRGC fast attack vessel approached a tanker at high speed. No warning protocol. The boat opened fire. Less than 2 hours later, 5 miles away, a container ship took a direct projectile impact. Cargo destroyed, steel bent. And yet, no fire, no sinking, no fatalities on either vessel. That restraint was not an accident. It was a doctrine. Iran has spent 4 decades perfecting what military analysts call calibrated coercion. Hit hard enough to demonstrate control, stop precisely short of the threshold that would justify a full American military response. It is a knife's edge strategy they have been executing since 1988, and they are extraordinarily good at it. Marine traffic data confirmed what followed. Ships throughout the region began to slow, to divert, to anchor in international waters rather than risk the passage. India summoned Iran's ambassador. Brent crude, which had briefly dipped below $90 a barrel when the ceasefire looked like it might hold, surged more than 7% in Asian markets by Monday morning, climbing back toward $95 a barrel. That number is not abstract. Every dollar on that barrel is already moving toward your fuel pump, your grocery bill, your electricity statement. Here is the part that Western media consistently fails to explain, and it is the key to understanding why this conflict has no clean exit. Iran exports roughly 80% of its petroleum toward China and Southeast Asia. That means when Iran tightens the strait, its most important customers are largely insulated. The pressure falls almost entirely on Western markets. And in one of the most striking economic ironies of this century, the blockade the United States imposed to strangle Iran is partially funding Iran's ability to resist it. Reports from multiple defense and trade analysts indicate that Iran has been levying transit fees on commercial vessels crossing the waterway, effectively taxing the nations trying to squeeze it economically. Trump's strategy assumed Iran would crack under pressure the way a business counterpart cracks in a negotiation. What he found instead was a civilization with 2,500 years of institutional memory, a population that survived 8 years of chemical warfare with Iraq, decades of international sanctions, and the assassination of one of its most senior military figures, and kept functioning. Asking Iran to surrender its nuclear enrichment capacity as an opening demand is not a trade offer. It is a demand for unconditional capitulation dressed in negotiation language. The IMF and the World Bank have both issued separate emergency warnings that this conflict now threatens to derail the entire global economic recovery. 54 days in, and not a single day of genuine peace. And the internal fractures inside American decision-making are widening. Secretary of State Marco Rubio continues to push maximum pressure, the belief that economic and military strain will eventually force Tehran to the table. But reporting from inside the Pentagon suggests senior military advisors are privately acknowledging that the April 13th blockade was a miscalculation, that it crossed the threshold of what the ceasefire permitted, that it handed Iran the moral high ground at the worst possible moment. Trump has oscillated between declaring the talks are going very well and threatening to bomb Iran again if it does not comply. That is not a negotiating strategy. That is improvisation at the highest possible stakes. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu watches from Jerusalem with what can only be described as calculated patience. Israel achieved its core objectives from the February 28th strikes, degrading Iran's military infrastructure, disrupting Hezbollah's logistics network, setting the nuclear program back significantly. But Netanyahu is now watching Trump attempt to negotiate an exit that could leave Iran's long-term nuclear potential intact. That is not what Israel designed this campaign to produce. And in southern Lebanon, the ceasefire that was supposed to hold alongside the broader truce is now fraying. A French soldier serving with the UN peacekeeping force was killed this weekend. President Macron publicly attributed responsibility to Hezbollah. If that front reignites before Wednesday arrives, the diplomats trying to close one conflict will suddenly be managing two. Pakistan is running every back channel it has, and time is almost gone. Pakistani mediators were the ones who brokered the April 8th truce that briefly dropped Brent crude 13% in a single trading session. They are the only party with functional credibility in both Washington and Tehran. But even Pakistani mediation cannot close the gap at the center of this crisis. Iran's 10-point framework demands economic compensation for war damages, full withdrawal of American forces from the region, and explicit recognition of its right to enrich uranium. The United States' 15-point counterproposal demands strict nuclear constraints and a rollback of Iranian regional military influence. These are not negotiating positions. They are civilizational statements, and the Wednesday deadline is now less than 48 hours away. Iran has already told Pakistani mediators it will not attend the second round of Islamabad talks, citing the ongoing blockade and what it called unrealistic demands from Washington. Trump announced an American delegation would travel to Pakistan. Iran said it would not be there. Two parties, one mediator, a deadline that does not move. Two paths diverge from Wednesday. In the first, Pakistan brokers a minimal truce extension. Trump quietly softens the blockade language without formally abandoning it. Iran reopens the Strait to commercial traffic as a face-saving gesture. Crude drops back below $90. Talks resume under enormous pressure with enormous gaps, but without active shooting in the water. This path requires both leaders to give their domestic audiences a version that looks like strength rather than retreat. That is not impossible. Skilled mediators have built harder narratives. In the second path, the ceasefire expires with no agreement. The IRGC intensifies Strait operations, not a full closure, but enough targeted disruption to make transit economically and physically dangerous. The United States responds with strikes on IRGC naval assets. Lebanon ignites. The conflict that was supposed to end becomes something larger and longer. Nobody wins. everybody bleeds. And the ordinary people paying the highest price are the ones who never sat at any negotiating table. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. It is not a military target. It is the pressure point of the entire 21st century global economy. If the assumption that this waterway remains functionally open becomes unreliable, not through a single dramatic closing, but through the slow, grinding reality that fast attack boats can determine who gets energy access and who does not, then the shift in global power playing out in those few miles of water between Iran and Oman will be larger than anything this region has produced since 1973. And unlike 1973, there are no untapped reserves waiting in reserve to compensate. This is what is at stake when the boats fire without a flag. This is what is at stake when a president threatens to bomb a country and then announces the talks are going very well in the same week. This is what is at stake when the IMF issues an emergency warning about a channel most people could not locate on a map yesterday. Wednesday may arrive as just another fragile extension held together with deliberate ambiguity and exhausted goodwill. Or it may arrive as the day the gray zone became something you can no longer look away from. The narrow strip of water where that answer gets decided is already affecting what you pay at the pump today. We will have a full daily update tomorrow with every development as it happens. Leave your read on this in the comments. One question, one honest answer. Do you believe Pakistan can close this in 48 hours, or has the window already closed? Every comment gets read. If this gave you clarity that the rest of the coverage did not, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening right now. And if this is the kind of daily analysis you want to stay ahead of events rather than behind them, subscribing takes 3 seconds, and it means you will never be the last to know.